Okay, keeping in mind that our kind of focus right now is working on opposites, right? Additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. Something I want us to want to point out to you is right here, we're combining expressions. And again, in our heads, we want to get solutions, we want to get answers. And that's not necessarily what happens when we're simplifying, okay? There's a difference between the word simplify and the word evaluate. Evaluate means get an answer. Simplify just says, you know what, try to make the problem look a little easier. So when we look here and it says subtract, we have 3x plus 5y minus 4. I do think it's a good idea, you guys, if you change things to addition. You don't have to. Sometimes that, people understand better if they don't. But my recommendation is to go keep, change, change. Okay? Now over here though, how do we think of this as keep, change, change? Okay? So instead, what I want us to do is I want us to think that we're subtracting everything in here. And that goes back to the notes we took in the last video. If I can get there. Okay, right here. The opposite. Think of opposite, right? We're not just, or subtracting. Subtracting the same thing as adding the opposite. We're not just subtracting the x here. We would subtract the x and the 3. Okay, or combine it with the negative x and the negative 3. So when we get right here, this part right here, when we're subtracting 4x plus 11, we're subtracting 4x and we're subtracting 11. So this ends up being 3x plus 5y. I'm going to try to maybe give myself a little more room there. 3x plus 5y plus a negative 4, okay, minus 4x minus 11. All the minuses and negatives can get confusing, so it's really important that you try to be very careful when you write it down. The other way we can think of this is we can think of this as plus and negative with that negative out front. And then that can be, think of it as distributing the negative 4 to the negative 11. Okay, you can either think of it as subtracting 4x or subtracting 11, or you can think of it as adding a negative 4x and adding a negative 11. Okay, again, see how it ends up being the same thing? Subtracting 11 is the same thing as adding the opposite of 11. So it's really going to depend on your comfort level, and I promise you're going to get better with this the more you work on it, okay? But when you have that minus and everything's in parentheses, you got to think of it as subtracting everything in there. Okay, let's look at some like terms here. I have 3 x's here and a negative 4 x's there. If I add 3 x's to a negative 4 x's, 3 plus a negative 4 is a negative 1x. If I take 5 y's and I add it to no more y's, that just stays 5 y's. And then, and I'm just making different marks around here, if I have negative 4 and I want to combine that with a negative 11, negative 4 plus negative 11 is going to be a negative 15. Not a negative 5, a negative 15. Okay, and really a lot of what we're doing in this lesson is just getting comfortable dealing with those minuses and negatives. Okay? Again, you could write this, though, as, negative x, drop the 1, plus 5y, instead of saying plus negative 15 minus 15. Okay, so moving on to our next one. This one says add here, but again, we can see that because we should be able to, the problems are always going to say subtract or add. We can be looking at that right there. So in this case, we're adding everything in here, all right? So again, I think you should change things to addition. So if I have 5a plus 3b, instead of saying minus 6, I'm going to say plus, not plus 6x. You can't just go minus to a plus. But subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. So that becomes negative 6c. So you can do it then, okay? So then we have plus our 2a plus minus 4b, or we can think of this as plus a negative 4b, because subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite, and then plus 13c. Okay, adding is kind of nice, right? Because you don't have to worry about distributing it out there. We're adding all of them. But that's where you gotta be careful here. It stays negative. So now let's look at our like terms. If I have 5a's and 2a's, 5 plus 2 is 7. That's 7a's. If I have 3b's and a negative 4b's, if I combine 3 plus a negative 4, that's a negative 1b. And then we have our c's, right? Again, if you want to square things, circle them, it doesn't matter. If I have negative 6 c's and 13 c's, if I go negative 6 plus 13, I get 7 c's. Excuse me. Now, I see a lot of people who still, they want to like add this up and say that's 6, right? And then 6 plus 7 is 13. So I have 7 or 13 ABC. No. Remember, like terms are identical variable parts. A is a variable, B is a variable, C is a variable. They're not identical. They're not the same thing. Okay? So you need to do it like this, or again, if you're not, you're better not changing things to addition, which I still recommend you do, you could write this as 7a, instead of saying plus a negative 1b, we could say minus b or minus 1b, and then plus 7c. Okay, that's it. It is okay to leave your answer with a's, b's, and c's. That's what simplify means. Okay. Oh, another subtract one. Let's practice it. So remember, what I'm subtracting is I'm subtracting everything in the second group of parentheses. So I can rewrite it. And please, please try to rewrite this until you get good at it. And then you can start doing some things in your head, but not yet. 2x plus 3y. Instead of saying minus 4, I'm going to go plus a negative 4. Keep, change, change. Subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. And then I'm going to think of it as maybe minusing 5x and minusing 2. Or you could go think of it as maybe distributing the negative, right? Instead of saying minus this, we can say plus the negative that, and then distribute that negative out. And this could be plus a negative 5x plus a negative 2. Okay. And try not to get sloppy like me, and make sure that your variables are, when y is a y and x is an x. Okay, so guess what? We're going to keep doing the same thing we've been doing. If I have 2 x's and a negative 5 x's, 2 plus a negative 5x is 2x's plus negative 5x's is a negative 3x's. You can circle things if you want. If I have 3y's and no more y's, I'll just go plus 3y's. And negative 4 and negative 2. If I had a negative 4 and a negative 2, that's going to be a negative 6. Okay? So again, this is our answer. Get used to your answers being expressions. Now remember, this is negative 3 times x plus 3 times y plus a negative 6. Or you could write minus 6. This is still a solution because as soon as we know what the values of x and y are, we can solve it. Okay, but until then, we just want to make a nice simple problem. Or simple-ish. All right, let's just look at a few more examples, okay? Write each expression in standard form. What's standard form? Simple as you can make it. And what you're going to see here, these are more of the types of problems that we're used to seeing, that we've been practicing. 7x plus 4 minus my 1x. I like to put a 1 in, okay? And then remember, that's going to be minusing my negative 2. That's a new one there, right? But we're going to minus everything. Be careful, okay? You don't get to not put that minus in or not put that negative in because there's a minus here. Write it, then simplify it. That's 7x's plus 4. Instead of saying minus 1x, I'm going to go keep, change, change, plus a negative 1x. Now I'm going to say, instead of saying minus negative 2, keep, change to a plus, change negative 2 to a positive 2. There's the bright side to changing things to addition. Now, like terms. If I have 7x's and a negative 1x, 7 plus a negative 1 is 6x's. If I have 4 and 2, if I add 4 plus 2 together, I get 6. And that's okay to have your answer look like that. Okay? Simple. Don't make this 12x. This is not x's. Okay? We don't know what the value of this term is yet because we haven't been able to figure out what x is yet or haven't been told. This one right here hopefully looks familiar, right? This is just 5 times negative 9x. So that's like saying negative 9x 5 times, right? So we just multiply the 5 and the negative 9 together, and that becomes negative 45x. The new one that we didn't spend a lot of time on, but really is not different from the chart we did in the first video, are these right here. 24x divided by 3. Remember, that's like saying 24x over 1 times 1/3. Basically, what this is getting us to do is write it with a fraction bar or a division bar. Okay? Now we can write it like this, but we still need to simplify it further. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So this just becomes 8x. And if you're looking at over here and you cross reduce, 1 and 1 have a common factor of 1, doesn't help. But 24 and 3, 3 goes into itself 1 time. 3 goes into 24 8 times, and we're just left with 8x times 1 and 1 times 1 on the bottom. And so that just gives us 8x. Okay? Don't overthink that this is something that super new to us. It's something we've been doing. We're just thinking about it a little differently. So for example, this one here, 36x divided by 4x, I can think of that as 36x's divided by 4x's. And writing it with that division bar becomes very important when we start solving with solving equations. Okay? Now if you look here, we can actually break this up into two parts. 36 divided by 4, that's 9. But what's x divided by x? 1. So this actually has that variable cancel out. There's nothing wrong with having the variable cancel out too. That happens because remember, it's a number. If this was 5, 5 divided by 5 is 1. X divided by x is 1. Okay? So my advice for these is just to take your time, use the things you already know, additive inverses, multiplicative inverses, opposites and reciprocals, and be very careful about not losing any negative signs.